All right, time for a hopefully quick Tanya in-depth shiur. Very interesting subject going on today. We're in Parak Lamed Zayin. That is where our conversation will take place. And to that end, we have an interesting subject lined up. Let's just jump right into it. So in Parak Lamed Zayin, the Alter Rebbe essentially divides it into 3 tiers. We'll get to that shortly. There's a lot going on, and I want to try to do it a little bit off Seder, even though it's going to be difficult because this is one of the shiurim that really you could jump all over the place. You can elaborate on a lot of points. The point is that the Alter Rebbe is talking about things that he's talking about making a dira bitachtonim, and it's part of like the hemshech of what he's talking about. He's saying the ultimate of the completion of the Mashiach is that we should have Gili brought about by our Aveda down here, that it should be again with the theme of dira bitachtonim. So he says one way that we do that is we take the physical and we utilize it for the spiritual. And so he says one example for that is klaf for tefillin. That it says that everything for tefillin needs to be from tehirim, it needs to be from animals that are kosher. We darshan that is Laman Teres Hashem b'picha, that it says about tefillin that it needs to be mutter b'picha. It needs to be something that's mutter for you. And then the Alter Rebbe continues that he says the same thing is with an esrog, which is not urla. And there's a note over here. We'll get to the note. The note is going to be the focus as the Shem of the shiur. And he says an esrog that is an urla. He says money of tzedakah that isn't stolen, and the life that when you use them for a mitzvah, the vitality of these things, the life that is in these things, is able to be utilized for making a dira bitachtonim. That is, I guess you could say, and the quote is not really a quote. The quote that we are going to quote is the Haggah, the note of the Alter Rebbe that he has on esrog she'ein urla. And in the note he says, the urla is from the 3 impure klippos, impure shells, etc. A long story. That she'ein lahem aliyah lo'elam, they don't have any elevation ever. As it says in Eitz Chaim. V'chein kol mitzvah haba b'avera chas v'shalom. And this is also the case with any mitzvah that comes through an avera chas v'shalom. This is the note of the Alter Rebbe over here. So I'm going to ask such a niglah'dike question. I hope that you guys are ready for this. Guys, girls, v'chulu, v'chulu. I hope that you're ready for this. In hilchos dalin minim, hilchos lulav, if you will, in Siman Tov Reish Mem Tes, there is a conversation. It happens in the Magen Avraham. It originally happens in the Shiltei Giborim, but it happens also in the Alter Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe says that what happens if you have an esrog that is orla of chutz la'aretz. Now, for anyone that's rushing up on their Yeridea, Siman Reish Tzadik Dalid, orla of chutz la'aretz is actually aser. It's not aser the same way that orla of Eretz Yisrael is aser. It's aser from a halacha mishmei Sinai. When we learn about the mitzvah of orla, it is particularly related to the land of Eretz Yisrael. You might think that there's no orla in chutz la'aretz, so halacha mishmei Sinai. Moshe Rabbeinu knows because Hashem told him by Har Sinai that orla in chutz la'aretz still applies. However, there are major differences. The primary difference is that you don't have to worry about any kind of suffix of orla. If you do not know specifically that this food is orla, that this produce is orla, you don't need to be worried about it. In Eretz Yisrael, of course, you need to treat it like any other suffix, and suffix that is halachmer, etc., etc. Chutz la'aretz, even if you have a field and you have 1,000,000 trees that are orla and you have 1 tree that isn't, you can eat as many apples from that field as you would like. It doesn't matter. Every single apple is considered to be totally fine. So in hilchos dalin minim, what happens is the Alter Rebbe comes and he says, and it's really from the Magen Avraham and it's really from the Shiltei Giborim, and the Alter Rebbe says, what happens if you have an esrog and it's orla? An esrog of orla, you're not allowed to use. What's the reason? Because we darshan in Masechah Sukkah that it says you should take for you, and the for you in this context means that it needs to be permissible to you, particularly for eating. That's what an esrog is for. It's used for eating. It comes actually in a lot of halachic contexts. The idea of an esrog for eating in hilchos erevin. Also, in regards to Yerusha, if I'm not mistaken, it comes off once or twice. Excuse the siren in the background. So esrogim are for eating. They're a fruit, and so it needs to be permissible in the way that it's normally used. So it needs to be edible. Esrog of orla, you're not able to eat, so it's not mutter lechem. So therefore, it is disqualified. What happens if you have an esrog of orla and chutz la'aretz? Okay, it's still disqualified. Why? Because halacha mishmei Sinai, orla applies in chutz la'aretz, so you're not allowed to use it. What about to give to your friend? Your friend doesn't know that it's orla. For him, it should be mutter. Are you allowed to give an isser to your friend? So in general, you're definitely not allowed to give an isser to your friend. We had actually, it definitely came up in earlier shiurim. you're not allowed to give an isser to your friend. But with an esrog of Orla, there's something to be said, because you have a Gemara in Kiddushin. And the Gemara in Kiddushin, there's back and forth, and there are different ways of understanding the Gemara. You could just take it that there are different ways of understanding the Gemara. However, there is a statement that Levi, the great Amira, said to Shmuel. He said that you can buy Orla for me, and I will eat it. Essentially, what he was saying, according to the understanding of a lot of Rishonim, is that as long as Levi doesn't know specifically that the food that Shmuel is giving him is Orla, Levi is allowed to eat it. So Levi wasn't concerned with the Orla of Chutz La'aretz. And there are ways that you can understand the story that Levi was just saying that there's no Orla of Chutz La'aretz. We're going to get to that as Hashem. But at least one way of understanding the Gemara is that Levi was saying that as long as I don't know that it's Orla, I'm able to eat it. So because there's this opinion that exists, says Alter Rebbe, it's slightly different from the Magen Avraham, slightly different from the Shiltei Gemara. The Shiltei Gemara seems to just hold this is the halacha. They're pasha allowed to give your friend Orla of Chutz La'aretz as long as they don't know that it is Orla of Chutz La'aretz. So as long as you don't know that it's Orla of Chutz La'aretz, so Levi says that you're allowed to give to your friend. That's Levi's opinion. And Levi says not only you're allowed to give to your friend, give it to me. As long as I don't know about it, I'm totally fine with it. So the Alter Rebbe says because there's this opinion that exists, that means that for your friend, it's mutter to be eaten. It's mutter for him to be eaten. So you're allowed to give him an esrog. You're not allowed to use this esrog on Sukkot, but your friend is allowed to use it. Why? He doesn't know that it's Orla. In theory, you could take this esrog, go around the Miftaim, use it for a Miftaim, because the people on Miftaim, not only do they not know that it's Orla, they don't even know what Orla is, l'chera. So you give them the esrog, no problem. There's, I guess, some kind of level of preference given to not such an esrog. But the Alter Rebbe says, seeing as there's this opinion, even though the Alter Rebbe says we don't hold like this, halacha l'maisa, you're not allowed to give your friend an esrog of Orla to eat. But for Daled Minim, the Alter Rebbe says it's fine. You're allowed to give it. So, a very interesting thing going on over here. Now, I'm going to take this back to Alter Rebbe in Tanya, and we're going to ask a question. By the way, the shiur will rely on an axiom, kind of. I mean, you might have already seen it, that we're going to have to assume the Alter Rebbe and Tanya and the Alter Rebbe in his Shulchan Aruch are kind of on the same page, because you could just Tanya that the Alter Rebbe was chayzer in this idea, and then the whole question falls apart, and I'm not going to say the whole shiur falls apart. You can still take it, but at least it helps things glide along. So the very nudniky question is based on what the Alter Rebbe is saying over here. An esrog that's not Orla, or let's show this clip that's made, it doesn't have any aliyah. What are you accomplishing by giving this esrog to the guy? Memela, you're allowed to eat it. Fine, that in itself is already a big question. How are you allowed to eat it? But to say that you're going to start using it for Daled Minim, how are you able to say that? By the way, as far as the eating it goes, there is a big discussion in the Kabbalists about if you have food that, let's say, you know for a fact that a little bit of milk splashed into the soup, and it's also l'shishim, right? I should say not milk, let's say, because milk, you could kind of never even becomes in a sir. Let's say you have a little bit of chazarai falls into a soup, and now it's also l'shishim. Is there an inyan to avoid eating the food? Is there an inyan to avoid eating the food? There is safe in there. So some people want to say that there's no inyan to avoid eating the food. It doesn't matter, but there's no inyan to avoid it. It's mutter. It's like regular kosher food. Some people say, no, you should still avoid eating the food. Why? There's food in there. It's klipa. And so you should try to avoid eating it. The Shlah, if I'm not mistaken, says actually, punkt verkehrt. You should try to dafke eat this food. Why? Because this food somehow has inside of it that it has klipa, but you're elevating it. You're able to take the food now that you took the klipa and you made it mutter. You're not obviously not allowed to do it lechatchila. Again, we had an earlier share about this, but the Shlah says, if I'm not mistaken, it's the Shlah, that you should actually go out of your way, you should chase it down, and you should eat it. But over here, we have, in a sense, a different concept going on. You have an esrog. The esrog, according to halacha, is treif. By the way, it's funny because the way that we know that it's treif is because in the Torah, it's an avrod, if I'm not mistaken, and also in the Rambam, and so the Beis Yosef is medayek, and he says if they're not bringing it, then l'chera they hold not like this. They hold not like this interpretation of the Gemara, and it's like a regular thing. You know that it's also, once you know that it's also, you're definitely not allowed to give it to the other guy. If he's eating it, that's his thing. He doesn't know. Maybe you don't have to separate him. It would be a good question if you have to separate him. But at the end of the day, you're definitely not allowed to give it to him lechatchila. You know that it's also. And the Alter Rebbe says we hold like that. The Alter Rebbe explicitly says that we hold like that. But for esrog, for some reason, we say now that you're allowed to rely on him. What's going on over here then? The Alter Rebbe comes, he explicitly says in the footnote that the esrog is from shalosh klipas setzimis and it doesn't have aliyah le'ilam. My high. If this esrog is taka also, then you shouldn't have any aliyah. And you shouldn't be able to say that you're not allowed to eat it, but you're able to use it for daled minim. If you're not allowed to eat it, it should be that you're taka not allowed to. And it seems, by the way, that what the Alter Rebbe is saying over here is not just the idea of using something for a mitzvah. It doesn't say, let's say, for example, tzitzis. Not mentioned over here. Why tzitzis b'chlal? When we give examples of taking the mundane and the physical and making it spiritual, tzitzis is a prime example. You take temer gashmi, and also it's about the idea of having a shiur, that it needs to be yud beis gudlin, and why not? Seemingly over here, what he's going for particularly is the idea that it can't be something that comes from an impure source. That's why he's saying it's tefillin dafka. He's talking about specific halacha, that it needs to be from things which are permissible to you. Esrog can't be erla, tzedakah can't be gezel, but it needs to be dafka, that it's not from a bad source. And so over here we're talking about an esrog that can't be erla. We have a case, seemingly, where the esrog is taka erla. Halacha l'maisa, you're not allowed to eat it. Not only you're not allowed to eat it, you're not allowed to feed it to your friend, but somehow you're able to use it. This is a very convoluted question that I wanna start off with, kind of. And with this convoluted question, I think we can answer the next question, which the next question is, what's going on that in the Ha'ara Mitamol, Alter Rebbe says, so too with every mitzvah haba b'avera, every mitzvah that comes with an avera, chas v'shalom, this is the same concept. The funny thing is, you have a mitzvah haba b'avera that you actually ate to the mitzvah. For example, shofar, you still a shofar, right? Not just that you blew a shofar that's not yours. You have a kill. I mean, you could also have that. You also have that concept. Ein gezel b'kill, right? But at the end of the day, ein gezel b'kill. But at the end of the day, we say that if your taka is stealing a shofar, then you shouldn't make a bracha on it. Why? Because it's like you're making you're sticking it to Hashem, that you're doing an avera and you're doing it to do a mitzvah. So you have the concept of mitzvah b'avera, and seemingly it's a mitzvah. You're yet to the mitzvah with it. Tefillin, if you try to use a chazer skin, you're not going to be yet to tefillin. Esrog, you try to use regular arla, you're not going to be yet. So you have a more niche case where it could be a kind of arla that you taka know that's arla, and it's taka for the entire world as far as you're concerned, but your friend is able to use the esrog. Okay, fine, that's a question in and of itself. Mitzvah b'avera, what's going on over here? Also, if mitzvah b'avera was something that was so obvious, stick it in the pnim. And isn't like why mention it only in the Ara? You have the more niche case, I would say, of giving tzedakah from gezel. You feel like a lot of people that aren't necessarily honest in business, but at least they give a lot of tzedakah. But why is it that mitzvah b'avera is being mentioned dafka in conjunction with esrog being arla? It feels a little bit funny. Maybe to make a second Ara, the Alter Rebbe is no stranger to doing Aras one after the other. You only need to look as far as, I think, Parak Mem to see you have a lot of Aras one after the next, Hagayis, I should say. So the question is, what's going on over here with the concept? Now, in order to understand this, I want to take a look a little bit at the broader stroke of Parak Lamed Zayin. And someone actually asked me why Parak Lamed Zayin is so long. And B'chlal, again, this is going to have to tie into, maybe I'll figure out how to tie it into a good shiur about the editing of Tanya to a certain extent. I don't know if it's necessarily if this man is grama, but at the end of the day, Parak Lamed Zayin is a rather long chapter, and you have, not only is it a rather long chapter, but you actually have a pretty big break. Usually you have 2 dots or whatever it is, but you have a full paragraph break by Zeisvei Dacheres, and it's a pretty long chapter. I'm just leafing through the pages. It's pretty long. I want to just talk about the general stroke of Parak Lamed Zayin. Again, you should be learning it before, so what I'm going to talk about, I'm not going to necessarily be pulling quotes from it, but you should be aware of what's going on. I believe that there are 3 tiers of what the Alter Rebbe is talking about in Parak Lamed Zayin in regards to how we make a dira bitachtonim, how we're able to draw godliness into the world. The first tier is the tier of elevating the physical. We will save that for last, Bezos Hashem, because that's going to be how we're going to kind of answer the question. The second tier is the tier not just about the world, but it's about you as a person. Now, you as a person, there are many different parts. There's the more external. You have a body, and you have the skin on the outside, if you want. You have different limbs that have different powers. They do different things. And you also have a general power of vitality. You have a nefesh achionis, a vital soul, a soul that gives life. The animation that we have. We're people and we're alive, and we move around and we do things. Is it the soul that feels? Is it the soul that thinks? Is it the soul of instinct? It's none of those things. It is simply the fact that we are alive. I don't know if we mentioned it in an earlier share. I might have planned the share and not gotten around to giving it about this concept, but there are some midrashim that they mention the concept of a neshama. Hashem is constantly putting our neshama into us. Why? Because whenever we breathe out, it's our neshama trying to escape. And then Hashem is melech al eretz kavodei. I probably don't remember if we gave a share about melech al eretz kavodei. But Hashem is melech al eretz kavodei. So he pushes the neshama back into the body. And neshama is literally our breath. Our breath is the neshama to a certain extent. So when we say the nefesh hachyonis, we're referring to the fact we're alive. We have a soul that's animating us and making that we are alive. It's at the very bottom of the levels of souls. And you would say maybe the nefesh hamas is on top of that, nefesh seichel is on top of that. But that is, you would say, the nefesh hachyonis. When we do a mitzvah, let's say a person wraps tefillin on their arm, they're taking their arm, which has a certain amount of vitality in it, and they're now using not just the tefillin which is multiplificha, etc., but they're now elevating a part of themselves. And then the Alter Rebbe is maflig on the niglah'dike tzedakah, the great advantage that tzedakah has, because it takes, in a sense, the entire essence of who a person is, and brings it close to Hashem. In a very general sense, you can appreciate this in a more tangible way if you're working for a living, and you make money, and so a certain amount of hours equates to a certain amount of money, and so if a person makes $20 an hour, a minimum wage going up, etc., person makes $20 an hour. When they give $20 to tzedakah, it represents an hour of their life, of their existence. They're taking an hour of their nefesh hachyonis, animating the body, being in the body, making that the body is alive, and they're giving it to Hashem. That is the great niglah'dike tzedakah in a very tangible sense. And then even if a person isn't necessarily working for a living, but there's still the point that money buys food. B'chlal, there's, I believe it's the Taz that says there's a svara g'dela to say that the value of a protah should be tied to food. Should be tied to the amount of money that it takes to buy a minimal amount of bread. I did the math a few years ago when a loaf of Wonder Bread was like $2 and it came out to about 10 cents. I don't know where Wonder Bread is holding now. I do know that the price of silver is on the rise. It's come up in a few contexts for some reason, more so than the slice of bread that you would buy in Walmart. I don't live too close to Walmart. Anyhow, I digress. Ultimately, yeah, there's this great svara to say that is how the value of money that is how money should be valued, I should say. So, the value of how much food you could get, which keeps you alive, sustains you, is something that you give when you give it to tzedakah. And so, in a sense, there's an exchange rate. It's not just necessarily how much effort you put in, but it's how much could be supporting you, could be sustaining you. And you're giving that to tzedakah, you're giving that to Hashem. And so, again, it's also the idea of giving the nefesh hachyonis. Then it talks about the third greatest mila, to a certain extent the greatest mila, even though it's the most removed in a certain sense. As you get greater and greater, you also get more and more removed from the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is dira, bitachtonim, and when you get to something so lofty, you kind of lose a little bit of the tachtonim aspect. But at the end of the day, at least for myself, we're still grub, and we still live in the world. And the idea of taking a piece of flesh that is the brain and utilizing it to think about the Eibishter, to think the wisdom of the Eibishter, is still a bitachtonim. So the great advantage of Torah is that you take not just the nefesh hachyonis, you're able to take the entire person and elevate the entire person. More than just the life and the vitality of the person, the essence, the thing that separates a person from something else. Humans stick around and couches also stick around. Humans stick around, humans grow, and plants also grow. Humans can think and animals can also think. But there's something special about a person, a consciousness, a self-awareness. And a person is able to take that, the intellectualism, the rationalism, they're able to put it into making a different tachtonim. They're able to elevate what makes them a human, what makes them a person, what makes them who they are. And that's the great niglah'dike Torah in regards to making a dira bitachtonim. These are all the great advantages. Going back to the first part, which we didn't really elaborate on, you have the idea of the physical world. We're also here to elevate the physical world. And at the end of the day, taka this idea of halas nitzitzis, and the halas nitzitzis is not specifically in us. It's also b'chal in the world around. And part of the idea of going into galus is only so that we should have gerim, so that we should be able to elevate the sparks of holiness. And so you have in the world a lot of holiness. That being said, when it comes to the world, when it comes to holiness in that regard, there's very specific rules. Not everything could be elevated. Some things we need to wait. There's the idea of Chazer. We just had Parshas Kisisa not too long ago. The idea of Basar Chalav, Parshas Shvatim also. The idea of Basar Chalav, that there are opinions, Rabbeinu Bechaya, etc., that when Mashiach comes, it's actually going to be mutter. There's a certain idea, I think the Rebbe Rav has a mimer about it in Samach Zayin, if I'm not mistaken. But you have the idea that certain things when Mashiach comes will be more accessible to use for holiness, but at the end of the day, for now, there are certain things that we just can't use for holiness. So I think if we're looking at the concept, this is what the Alter Rebbe is referring to. In contrast to the Yid, the person, the Yid, that they're able to elevate their entire nefesh achyonis, every part of their body. The Sefer Charedim has, for every body part, the mitzvahs that you could do with it. For every part of the Yid's body, there's a little spark of life, and you're able to elevate that spark of life. And for the intellect of a Yid, of course, Torah is Yaakov. But then when it comes to the world around us, it's not so simple. Some things can be elevated. Most things, if you will, can be elevated. But there are some things that also can't be elevated. When you have, let's say, a donkey, you could do a mitzvah of arifas padrachamer. But are you elevating the body of the donkey with it? You're not elevating the body of the donkey with it. When you do the mitzvah of arifas padrachamer, what's happening is something like this. You have the fact that the value is supposed to go to the kohen. That is something, the taka, vitality, the value, what you could have bought with it, etc. You're giving that to the kohen, and that's one of the manas kohono, something that the Eibush gives to the kohenim. And so, by dint of that, you're elevating the value. A similar concept to tzedakah. It's not something that exists necessarily in the same way as tzedakah, but there are enough similarities you can let that idea go. Are you elevating the donkey when you do that? The donkey is chayil. The donkey stays chayil. The original owner of the donkey gets to keep the donkey, the kohen gets to keep the sheep, and the donkey is redeemed. Is the donkey holiness? Is it a chayfus of holiness? Certainly not. I've never seen any concept. I mean, it's possible someone out there would Tanya such a thing, but I definitely never seen anything. There's no kedusha that's niglah'dike in any area of halacha that I've ever seen. This is the deal with the donkey. What happens when you are eir of it? It seems to be a simple cheshbon that you took away the hana from the kohen. So Hashem's taking away the hana from you. Is the donkey now holy? Also no. Not only is the donkey not elevated, but now it's also bahana. It becomes the same also bahana. Now it's like arla, now it's like klipa, etc., etc. So it's not necessarily that you made more klipa in the world, but now, I mean, I'm not a Kabbalist. I don't dabble in these things. But at the end of the day, you didn't do something holy with the donkey. The donkey was safe, and it will always be safe. Maybe when Mashiach comes, I don't know. Again, I'm not a Kabbalist, but you didn't do something to elevate the donkey per se. Tefillin, there's a lot of good things that happen. You elevate your meichin with it. You put it on your arm and on your head, and so you elevate the kayach, the chiyunis that's inside of those. It's all good and well. But the thing about tefillin, what you do in elevation with, is the fact that it's mutar b'ficha. There are some things, and they are attuned for being vessels for holiness, and there are some things, and they are not. Some things are klipas nega, and you could use it either way, and some things have different aspects of them that are klipas nega, and certain aspects that are, you would say maybe klipas, like for example, you can ultimately utilize a donkey for mitzvahs. Mashiach is going to become riding on a donkey, at least if he's in Ani Rechav al-Achamar. So you have the idea that you have some things that they're able to be utilized for holiness, even if they're not necessarily holy in and of itself. Something that the essence of what it is can't be elevated, but there are other ways that you can manipulate it, that you could use it for holiness. Like, for example, like again, going back to the donkey, it's not necessarily that the donkey itself, the body of the donkey is getting elevated. It's that you own the donkey, and so the power of the donkey, the value of the donkey, whatever it may be, is being used towards something holy. Yaakov Avinu says in the Kutei Torah, if I'm not mistaken, brought karbanis to Esav, and somehow he was able to manipulate things. I say brought karbanis to Esav, it means that when he sent the mincha to Esav, so it was like al derech karbanis, and somehow that caused an elevation. What, how, who, when, where? I don't know. It's not my place to know. But I think that typically when you use something, could it be like a carbon? You could say that. But again, a carbon is not even necessarily to elevate the thing itself. You do have that aspect as well, but you also have the aspect that it comes from you as a person, and that's supposed to be elevated. So you have, in a sense, essentially, this difference between the person, the gavra, and the hefza. A lot of things come down to that. The person, are they being elevated? Is the nefesh achyonis being elevated? And you also have, is the thing itself being elevated? So when it comes to esrog, and esrog being erla, you have the concept that to use an esrog, it needs to be lochem. It needs to be something that's permissible to you. That we learn that we learn with tefillin. Even though with things with kosher, it makes a lot of sense. It needs to be permissible, and that's the only way that it can be elevated. And it's kind of self-understood that if it's safe, you can't eat it and elevate it. And if it's kosher, you can't eat it and elevate it. That's kind of the nature of what it is. But you have also other things like tefillin that it's not specifically that it has a specific material that it needs to be made out of. And Alter Rebbe, tefillin actually doesn't have a specific material that it needs to be made out of. In theory, you'd be able to use fish skin in order to make tefillin. However, we say that there's it exudes a certain kind of zuhama, and so you're not able to use it practically. It does actually ask the question. Nowadays, they're scientifically figuring out how you can make leather out of fish skin, and the question would be, would you be able to make tefillin out of fish skin? In this case, a new messias about fish skin, salmon skin, like and kosher fish skin. So, but that's just a side point. The point is that you ultimately have this idea that tefillin, besides from needing to, it's not a specific material. It actually isn't a specific material. Tzitzis needs to be wool or linen, and both of those materials happen to be mutter. If you say beficha, I don't know if you say linen is necessarily mutter beficha, even though it is from a plant and the plants have seeds. The linen itself is made out of more of the stalks, and you hammer them, and you pound them out, I should say, and you make fabric with it. You make threads and then fabric with it. But it is from two specific kinds of things. You don't even need to bring out the point that it needs to be some kind of heter. When it comes to tefillin, you do need to bring out the point that it needs to be some kind of heter. Why? Because it does happen to be that over here, the deciding factor is this thing fit for being elevated in that way? Tefillin, it doesn't matter what it is, it needs to be just something that is mutter b'ficha from the animal world. And the same thing would apply also to arla from an esrog. I want to leave arla from an esrog for the side for just a short while longer, but just to briefly talk about tzedakah, giving tzedakah from gezel. You have this concept. Tzedakah from gezel, it needs to be from you. It needs to be that you are giving. And so if you give the tzedakah, nehi, that you could have used the money for yourself. And I do think that you do actually chaperein this second point. If a person, you have a notorious thief, a notorious gangster, they're stealing a lot, a person that cheats on their taxes, whatever it is, ultimately when they get tzedakah, that money is money that they worked for. It's money that they put in time and effort. And even if it were money that they put in time and effort for, they managed to stole it, and it was completely not to scale the amount of effort for the amount of money. But at the end of the day, it's money that they could have used to support themselves. They could have gotten away with it, and they would have gotten away with it, and they are getting away with it, and they're giving the money for tzedakah, and at the end of the day, it is money that they could have used to support themselves. And I think that this middle aspect that the Tanya is talking about, the idea of nefesh achyonis, and you're elevating your whole self, I think that does happen when a person gives tzedakah from gezel. But what they're actually giving, when they give the tzedakah, if it's from gezel, they're taka not elevating. I think this is the point of the Alter Rebbe. And now to talk about an esrog from arla. I think that it is possible to do a mitzvah with something and to not elevate the thing. This is, I think, the point of an esrog of arla. That even if a person taka does do the mitzvah with an esrog of arla, that the friend gave it to them and they're doing it, are they elevating the esrog? Seemingly not. The esrog is taka gimel kipus atzmiyas halachol mishum Sinai arla and chutz la'aretz, and it is taka. That is how it is. You can ask, by the way, the same question with an esrog from Eretz Yisrael, that it's arla and it happens to be batul b'masayim. That's the bittul for arla, if I'm not mistaken. 1 and 200. So you have 200 esrogim. Into them falls one esrog of arla. It gets mixed all around. 201 people come. They all pick up the esrog. They all make a bracha. They all shake the daled minim. And one of them uses an esrog of arla. That person's esrog was taka not elevated, seemingly. When it's the case of arla of chutz la'aretz, you give to the friend, and the friend is taka not elevating the arla. They're not causing that the arla now has that's a chayfetz of a mitzvah. They're not causing that it is the. They're not causing that the holiness is redeemed because it's shalosh klipas atmeis. Arla shalosh klipas atmeis, and you can't have any elevation. So as far as the question of when you give it to him, taka is able to be yet to the mitzvah. He's taka able to be yet to the mitzvah, but the esrog isn't elevated. The same thing with the mitzvah abal ba'aver that continues Alter Rebbe, the exact same concept. Why? Because when a person blows shofar with the stolen shofar, they're still yet to the mitzvah. In gezel b'kol, the kol isn't stolen. They did a mitzvah abal ba'aver. It's not proper to make a bracha on him. Why? Because it's b'tzei berach nes Hashem. What's b'tzei berach nes Hashem? Is it saying necessarily that it's also to make a bracha? Seemingly not, because this idea of b'tzei berach nes Hashem is a chiddush of the achreinim. When it comes to things like this, it's not something that's brought necessarily. But you have in machlokes yishenim about is b'tzei berach only that you're not allowed to make a mezuman on stolen food, or is it taka that you're not allowed to make berachas hamazon? The ma'isa. We try to be machmer for the suffix if it's diraisa, but we're makel. I say makel, and it's to say suffix brachas lahakil that you do not make a bracha if it's any kind of case of derabanan. There are little differences, and I and Shaman. I'm trying to remember what similar it is. Well, one of the tzaddiks, if I'm not mistaken, tzaddik. I'm not remembering off the top of my head, but the concept of b'tzei berach is really about things like that. When it comes to mitzvah bal ba'avera, it's a later conversation that people say it's the similar concept of b'tzei berach nes Hashem, and really it fits because in this thing, in the physical thing, you're not able to draw down godliness. How would you be able to draw down godliness? It's gimel klipsa, not gimel klipsa tmeis, but you're doing an avera. There is an avera going on over here. There is klipa, there is tuma going on over here. How are you able to draw godliness into that? Now, to a certain extent, you can at the same time, a mitzvah is being done. You, as a person, nefesh achionis, mitzvah is being done. And so you could say very easily that you should be making a bracha. And so you have this kind of back and forth. Really, with giving the esrog, you should be having a niglah'dike question. What's the niglah'dike question? You're giving him the esrog, he's going to shake the esrog, and what is he going to do? He's going to make a bracha before. I'll only say that's the lulav. You can say maybe the bracha is only on the lulav. Maybe the lulav is being elevated. What happens if you have a heichatimsa, which you can't necessarily give it to Alter Rebbe. You could also make easier ways for this to happen. You have a heichatimsa, a person already picked up a lulav hadassim and a ravis. And it's a halacha that if you have all of them in front of you, you're able to pick up one at a time, or not necessarily one at a time. It's possibly the lulav arava and adassim need to be at the same time. But regardless, ultimately, if they're all in front of you, you're able to pick up 3 of them, and then you're able to pick up the esrog. And you say, what do you do in such a case if you picked up the lulav adassim and aravis in order to be yetza, and you forgot to make a bracha? You make a bracha on tilas esrog, and it has happened. It's something that does happen often enough on sukkahs that a person picks it up and at least doesn't have in mind to not be yetza until they do the bracha, as is supposed to be, and everyone should prepare for the halachas of Sukkot before Sukkot comes, although we're before Pesach. But at the end of the day, person has the esrog, they pick it up, are they able to make a bracha on the esrog? It's not able to go on anything else, just the esrog. The person, again, remember, they have an esrog. The esrog is arla. They don't know that it's arla. You know that it's arla chutz la'aretz. You gave it to them to be to the mitzvah. So you say, and by the way, you'll make a bracha, and they'll say why, and you'll say, well, actually, I can't really tell you. They might suss out that it's arla. If you tell someone of same, they won't know the difference. But you have a person, are they able to make a bracha? And seemingly, you katana, that you don't need to tell them anything. And the Alter Rebbe is not made anything, and you katana also the idea of lulav on this, that really, according to the opinions that say that it's saket treif, you're not allowed to give it to them. And they're not allowed to be yetzer with it. So how are you able to do this? How are you able to not give them a warning? They'll make a bracha, and bracha v'atola is a very serious thing. Elamai, seemingly, the concept of not making a bracha on a mitzvah bal ba'avera is something that comes. It's an idea that exists, and you can decide to which extent it permeates. According to the opinions, that is fine. You wouldn't be allowed to make such a bracha. We pass like that. The mice that you are able to use it, and it would kind of ruin the ruse if you would be telling them to not make a bracha. You could tell maybe that's the reason why it says to not make a bracha, and maybe that in theory you should be warning them to not make a bracha. If you'd be able to find a way to get it across to them without. At the end of the day, tachlis keret is, it seems that this is the idea that you're not able to elevate the esrog. You should be making a bracha. Maybe you could be making a bracha on the fact that you yourself are doing it. That you're elevating your nefesh achionis, you're elevating your hand. The lulav needs to be nitol b'yad. Dalan minim machlal. So you can tell that that's what it is. Maybe you should be making a bracha for that. At the end of the day, is it drawing down holiness in the esrog? It is not. And again, that's the connection to mitzvah bal ba'avera, that it comes very much behind to this concept, because the whole concept of mitzvah bal ba'avera is that there is klipa, there is some over here, and that is why, even though you are yet to the mitzvah, in a lot of cases, you are yet to the mitzvah, but at the end of the day, you're not causing an elevation, you're not furthering the cause of dira bitachtonim, at least not as far as the object, as far as the world is concerned, maybe as far as you yourself are concerned, you are making a dira bitachtonim. And so with this, I think we can conclude a little bit with just the idea that there's many different aspects in which you can make a dira bitachtonim. You can make a dira bitachtonim by elevating the world around you. You can make a dira bitachtonim by elevating yourself, and you can make a dira bitachtonim by not just elevating your life, but by elevating the essence of who you are by learning Torah. All of these are good and important ways to make a dira bitachtonim, and obviously we should all try to chaparayin in all of them. They all have a certain advantage. The tzedakah is mitzvah stam, and that refers to the concept of elevating the nefesh achionis, elevating a person's vitality. Torah is the greatest mitzvah in a lot of different ways, and as the Alter Rebbe elaborates over here, and in Parakeh, etc., etc. The great maila and connection that a person gets when they learn Torah, and ultimately making a dira bitachtonim by gathering nitzvos of kedusha, and ultimately may it come the time that it will be bilam avos l'netzach, that will ultimately be able to elevate the entire world, kol olam kulei. And yeah, l'chaim, kosher freilich in Pesach. There should be some shiur before Pesach. That's Hashem.